I only saw Natalie 3 or 4 times in the couple of weeks after that, and when I did, it was much less enjoyable. I kept wondering things like whether she had ever had another man friend, and what she planned to do about men in amongst her other plans, and what she thought about me in that particular way, and not daring to ask her any of it. The closest I got once was when we were walking the fat off Orville again in the park. I said, "Do you think people can combine love with a career?" It came out and sort of hung there like a corpse. It sounded exactly like a question out of some magazine for homemakers. Natalie said, "Well, of course they can," and gave me an extremely peculiar look. Then Orville met a Great Dane on the path and tried to kill and eat it. When that was over, we had gotten past the stupid question, but I kept on being sort of solemn and moody. As we were coming home, Natalie said in a sort of wistful voice, "How come you never do that ape act anymore?" That burned me. That really burned me. When I got home, I was in a foul mood. What I want to do is take this girl suddenly in my arms and kiss her and say, "I love you," and what she wants is for me to jump around with a banana peel looking for fleas in it. I worked myself up good and proper. I resented her for being so friendly and matter-of-fact, and I deliberately thought about the way her hair looked when she just washed it and it was all sleek and soft, and the texture of her skin, which was white and very fine. And pretty soon I had managed to develop her into the real thing, the mysterious female, the cruel beauty, the untouchable, desirable goddess, you name it. So that instead of being my first and best and only real friend, she was something I wanted and hated. Hated because I wanted it, wanted because I hated it. In February, we drove over to the coast again. There's always a week around Washington's birthday that is fantastic. It stops raining, the sun gets warm, the leaf buds start showing on the trees and some first flowers come out. It's the first week of spring, and in some ways the best because it's the first and because it's so short. You can count on that week, and I'd planned ahead. I got her to get a substitute at the music school and postpone her lessons so that we could drive over to Jade Beach on Saturday. If her father made any static about it, I didn't care. She had to handle him. We were adults, and she had to learn to do without his approval for everything. And I was all ready to tell her exactly that if she mentioned her father, but she didn't. She didn't seem very enthusiastic about this trip, but I guess she knew I wanted it, so she did what I wanted, like a friend. When we got to the beach about 11 in the morning, it was low tide, and there were some people clamming. We'd worn shorts under our jeans this time, and we played in the surf again, but it was different. There was a low fog over the sand, not thick and cold, just a kind of dimming, as if the air was made of mother of pearl, and the waves were quiet and broke slowly, curving over themselves in long blue-green lines, dreamy and regular and hypnotic. We didn't stay together, but drifted apart, waiting in the breakers. When I looked, Natalie was way up the beach, walking slowly in the foam, kicking up spray. She walked a little hunched, with her hands in her pockets, and looked very small and frail there between the misty beach and the misty sea. The clammers left when the tide began to come back in. After about an hour, Natalie came wandering back. Her hair was all tangled in strings, and she kept sniffing. The sea air made her nose run, and we hadn't brought any tissues. She looked serene and distant, the way her mother always looked. She picked up some rocks, but most of them were the kind that are beautiful when wet, but nothing much when they dry. "Let's eat," she said. "I'm starving." I'd built a fire with driftwood in the same place as last time, in the hollow sheltered by the big log. She sat down right by the fire. I sat down right next to her. I put my arm on her shoulders. Then my heart started hammering in this terrifying way, and I felt really crazy and dizzy, and I took hold of her really hard and kissed her. We kissed, and I couldn't get my breath. I hadn't meant to grab her like that. I'd meant to kiss her and tell her I love you, and talk about it, about love, and that was all. I hadn't thought any farther. I didn't know what would happen to me, that it would be like when you're in a deep and a big breaker hits you and pulls you over and down, and you can't swim and you can't breathe, and there's nothing you can do. Nothing. She knew when the breaker hit me, and I guess it scared her too, but she wasn't caught in it, because she pulled free after a bit and drew back away from me. But she kept hold of my hand because she saw that I was drowning. "Owen," she said. "Hey, Owen, sweetheart, Owen, don't." Because I was sobbing. I don't know whether it was crying or because I couldn't breathe. I came out of it gradually. I was still too shaken up to be embarrassed or ashamed yet, and I reached for her other hand, so we were kneeling in the sand face to face, and I said, "Natalie, why can't... We're not kids. Don't you?" She said, "No, I don't, Owen. I love you. It isn't right." She didn't mean morally right. She meant right the way the music or the thought comes right, comes clear, is true. Maybe that's the same thing as moral rightness. I don't know. It was she who said, "I love you," not me. I never did say it to her. I said what I'd said before, stammering. I couldn't stop, and pulling her towards me. All of a sudden, her eyes got very bright, and she scowled and pulled away and stood right up. "No," she said. "I won't get into this bind with you. I thought we could manage it, but if we can't, we can't, and that's it. That's all. If what we have isn't enough, then forget it, because it's all we do have, and you know it, and it's a lot. But if it's not enough, then let it be. Forget it." And she turned and walked off down the beach to the sea in tears. I sat there for a long time. The fire went out. I went and walked up the beach by the foam line till I saw her sitting on a rock over the tide pools at the foot of the northern cliffs. Her nose was all red, and her legs were covered with goose pimples and looked very white and thin against the barnacle rough rock. "There's a crab," she said, "under the big anemone." We looked into the tide pool a while. I said, "You must be starving." "I am." And we walked back along the foam line and built up the fire and pulled on our jeans and ate some lunch. Not very much this time. We didn't talk. Neither of us knew what to say anymore. There were 10,000 things going on in my head, but I couldn't say any of them. We started home right after lunch. About at the summit of the Coast Range, I found the one thing I thought needed saying and said it. I said, "You know, it's different for a man." "Is it?" she said. "Maybe. I don't know. You have to decide." Then my anger came out and I said, "Decide what? You've already decided." She glanced at me. She had that remote look. She didn't say anything. The anger took over entirely and I said, "I guess that's always the woman's privilege, isn't it?" in this sneering, bitter voice. "People make the real choices together," she said. Her voice was much lower and smaller than usual. She started blinking and looked away, as if she was watching the scenery. I went on driving, watching the road. We drove 70 miles without saying anything. At her house, she said, "Goodbye, Owen," in the same small voice, and got out and went into the house. I remember that, but nothing after, nothing until the following Tuesday.